All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is my good friend Rania Khalek. Rania is an independent journalist whose work has been seen at Alternet, Truth Out, Salon, In These Times, all of which and more you can find at her blog, which is Dispatches from the Underclass, which you can find at raniakhalek.com. You can also find her on Twitter at Rania Khalek. Rania, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thanks for having me on again, Matt.
All right, so Rania, let's begin by discussing the killing of Kimani Gray by the NYPD. If people are not familiar with the case, describe what do we know about the situation so far?
Okay, well, a few weeks ago, early in March, Kimani Gray, a 16-year-old living in East Flatbush, a section of Brooklyn, was shot and killed by two plainclothes officers late over a weekend night, and he was and the officers. Well, the community was really upset about this. Kimani, if you've seen pictures of him, he looks like a harmless. Not only does he look like a harmless teenager, but he looks like he's like 12.
He's really young.
Right. So,
I mean, he's 16, and that's really young, but he looks younger than 16.
Exactly. And I mean, he's a pretty small guy in terms of he's not some huge built dude. So it's hard to think, oh, this guy was some big threat. Police claim that he was that he pulled out a gun on them, and that's why they shot him. In which case, if he did pull out a gun, it would be, they would be justified. But the issue is that a witness, multiple witnesses, there was one eyewitness. Other witnesses heard what was happening. The eyewitness says that she never saw a gun. She never saw Kimani Gray pull out a gun. She says the officers were lying. She also says that they shot him they shot him while he was backing away from them, and that they continued to shoot him while he was on the ground. And that when she yelled at them because she was because she was watching from her bedroom window, and she yelled out at them. Because she was shocked by what she was seeing, they actually, the eyewitness says that one of the officers actually threatened to shoot her as well. So, because of all the contradictory stories based on what the police say versus what witnesses have been saying, the community, Kimani Gray's community, is outraged, and that's what led to protests. But I mean, it wasn't just over Kimani Gray; it's the fact that this is a community that this is a community of color that is routinely harassed by the NYPD, as are most communities of color throughout New York City. And so these young people who were, it was young and old, but the young people who were protesting, I guess when the protest started, if people were following it, the protest, some people were calling it a riot because young people had split off from the protesters and had gone and engaged in vandalism. They went through some drugstore and pushed stuff over, and someone got assaulted. And then a couple nights later, and each night there was protest. There was 4 nights or 5 nights of protests in a row. Each night there was a really heavy police presence, to the point where some nights it was more police than actual protesters. So one of those nights, a lot of young teens from the neighborhood and outside the neighborhood were throwing bottles at police. Police car windows were smashed in. So a lot of people who are completely unfamiliar with the context surrounding the outrage this community is feeling called this a riot and don't understand why there's so much anger. But the fact is that these people are reacting to the kind of policing that they experience on a regular basis. A lot of that has to do with stop and frisk. Other parts of it have to do with just police harassment in general. In terms of being brutalized, there have been so many people who have been shot and killed by the NYPD of color, who have never, no one has ever been punished for it. A lot of times the people who do the shooting, the officers that do the shooting, are officers who have been involved with past shootings. So, there's just so much, there are just so many layers to this. But what it comes down to is that another young man of color was shot and killed. The story is once again not lining up. The witness's story is not lining up with what police are saying. And the community is just outraged. They want this to end. They want to be treated with respect. They don't, it's not fair for them to have to deal with this police state type occupation in their neighborhoods. And to like watch. I mean, parents have to literally have to worry about their children for multiple reasons, not just because they're in a poor neighborhood where, they might worry, they don't want their kids to get mixed up with the wrong people, but also the police that worry about the police hurting their children, because it's like the police aren't necessarily there to protect them.
No, absolutely not. And the fact, when you have just this really oppressive police presence that is like a lot of, not just in the NYPD. I mean, in New York, it's worse because of things like stop and frisk, where that's, that is just like a constant presence where, literally, if you're a young black person or a person of color, very likely you're going to get, like just pulled over and just like patted down.
Yeah.
Which is just for nothing, just for walking down the street. Like that wouldn't put you on edge enough and put you in a bad mood, because living under a police state where your person can be violated left and right just at the whims of a police officer. But again, it's like the kind of bigger point on this is like, we don't know. I mean, the NYPD hasn't said if he we don't know if there is a gun yet, right? That if he actually had a gun. Like the police are saying he had a gun, but they have not have they flat out said that we have recovered a gun that this kid had?
They say they recovered a gun, and I believe it was like a some kind of revolver. I mean, they say they recovered a gun, but here's the thing about the NYPD, and I'm not saying that they're lying. But it's based on past experience. It's understandable that based on the fact that there's a witness who says that Kimani Gray never pulled out a gun, that the friends that were with him that night, they had no idea he was even armed. I mean, there is nobody to corroborate that he had a gun, except for the police. And there is
who are frankly, and we should say this, not a trustworthy source.
Right, exactly. That's the point. Is that when it comes to what the police say, I mean, they have an incentive to lie for multiple reasons. But also, there have been instances in the past, not just with the NYPD, but with police departments in cities across the country, when it comes to minority communities in particular, with actually planting evidence on innocent people. Especially, I mean, just like a couple of years ago, or maybe it was last year, there was a huge scandal with the NYPD. Evidence came out that they actually had been planting drugs on innocent people to make arrests. So it's like, it's not hard to believe that this might have happened. I mean, the practice of placing a gun on a victim of police violence to make it look justified isn't something that's never happened before. I mean, it's rare. We don't know how often it happens, but it is a practice. I mean, they call them drop guns or throwaway guns. But again, this isn't something that's like really talked about ever. Or has really been studied comprehensively. So there's really no way to say. It's like it's literally the police, it's literally the word of the police versus the word of an eyewitness. So that's the unfortunate part about it. But it's also, it's also important to point out that even if Kimani Gray had not, even if police didn't find a gun or say that the gun wasn't an issue and they just shot him, that happens a lot too, where police shoot unarmed young men of color and women too, but it's mostly young men of color. It happens a lot. And it's completely justified. I mean, all that a police officer has to say is that they felt their life was being threatened. And that can mean anything, because that's about perception. Just because I might not be, my life might not be be under threat doesn't mean, I can perceive that, if I see a black man, that he's about to shoot me. That doesn't mean he necessarily is armed and about to shoot me. So that's basically kind of how it works. Police can say they feel, if they feel threatened and they shoot and kill someone, it's usually almost always justified.